Alrighty, on to the next part. I can't really show my face as I'm at work, but yeah, so this will give me a chance to edit in images to help kind of represent some of these concepts. As I want to talk about, in order to make sense of vampirism, I'm going to have to go on a tangent and a monologue about a few other things, and these are all things from my theological perspective, spiritual perspective, gnosis, things I can't prove. It's just how I make sense of the nature of reality, source, the soul, the spirit. And eventually, in the same video, I'd like to get to the point of explaining the nature of the soul and the spirit and why they're actually two very distinct things, and why one is separate from the other and one is intrinsically connected to the other. So yeah, this is going to be interesting. As I was just watching Psycho Sorcerer's video on Map of the Eternity, and I suppose this is my roadmap to explaining it from my perspective, so maybe he'll see this and find it interesting. So how do I put this? I have to kind of explain the nature of Midgard in order to help kind of grasp some of this. So using kind of yin-yang logic, I believe there is this cosmic void of nothingness where heat, fire, cold, nothing exists. It's a complete blank slate. It's a complete vortex of nothingness. And I think that's represented by certain primordial beings known as Tiamat, Diana, Kali Ma, the Theotokos from Christianity, the eternal dark mother, the Morrigan, right? Beings like that. And oh, hold on, I need to charge the vape. Gosh darn. But yeah, on the other side of Tiamat, you have Apsu, or Brahman, the monad, the all, the absolute reality, substance, material, energy, raw elemental energy, the world forge, so to speak, the eternal flame versus the eternal void. And as opposed to viewing that, like saying verses, it's better to say consummation. I don't know how the craziness of Yggdrasil was formed, but I believe that Yggdrasil, the world tree, is a living being, and it's sentient. You could call it the ultimate primordial, the ultimate kind of sentient manifestation of a non-sentient eternal force. And that sentience and purpose and function is what happens when a projection of the infinite goes into the eternal entropy, the eternal limited, the eternal nothing. And, it gives it a type of form. And I think, by sentient isn't really the right word. It's more to say that the tree is a creature, right? And it might do things that might seem like conscious thought, but it's not. It can make decisions like plants make decisions, like flora makes decisions, not fauna. And if a foreign entity, an archon, tries to invade the tree reacts by creating antibodies. It creates sap to fix wounds on the tree where bark has been knocked off of. The tree can produce antibodies, right? And the tree can have branches break off, which, those branches now no longer connected to the tree dissolve into nothingness. And, basically the tree, as any organism, wants to create more trees, so it has greater spheres. And this is a terrifying existential concept, but I believe that this, for some reason, I imagine it as golden light going into darkness, so like a gold yin-yang, except without the dots, where basically this projection, this phallic projection in the form of this advanced, probably the oldest species in all of the all, the ultimate projection, goes into the void. It grows from the dark waters, and underneath the dark waters is Brahman, and it manifests and grows into the void as a big tree that's self-sustaining, or rather sustains itself from Brahman. And the void caused by, because the tree itself is meant to be in Brahman. It's not meant to be in the void. So when it pulls itself into the void, or whatever, there is a dark tree or there's no life in it. There's no magic. There's no nothing. It's just like a footprint versus a foot. There's an empty vortex within source that is always the shape of whatever shape the actual tree is. So you could call it a dark tree, like a hollow vortex of void in the eternal, right? So it's like a cosmic shadow phallus, you could say. So you have these two trees. Or rather, you only have one tree, and then you have the shadow of the tree. It's very much like, the sun is shining over everything, and then a tree emerges, and then there's an actual shadow of the tree under the sun, because, its existence creates like this, I can't think of the word, but it blocks out the light. So there is kind of this outline of it, right? So the tree stands over where it should be. So it's a shard of Brahman, the monad, the all, in the void, right? And this being came from what I believe to be another thing exactly like it called Aldrasil. We live in Yggdrasil, but I believe Aldrasil was the tree before it. And I think there are many trillions of trees. It's an entire forest in this void of golden trees. And Aldrasil had a world with its own dimensions, its own equivalents of the physical and spiritual and timelines, or lack thereof. I can't, figure out the nature of it. But basically, when that greater sphere was populated with sentient life, and you got to think the Eternals and from Marvel, where you have the Celestials. In order to create universes, they plant their seed in a planet, and as the planet grows with life and civilization, this unconscious baby celestial feeds on the sentience of the planet, and then the planet blows up, killing everyone on it, and it turns into a celestial, and it creates its own galaxy.
It is time for you to learn the true purpose of your mission. You were sent to Earth to bring forth the celestial Tiamat. Every billion years, new celestials must be born. I plant celestial seeds into host planets across the universe. The planet Earth was chosen to host the celestial Tiamat. In order to grow, Tiamat needs vast amounts of energy from intelligent life. The deviants prevented this by consuming humans until the Eternals eliminated them. Now, the human population of this planet has reached the required amount. It is time for the emergence to begin.
Well, it's a similar kind of premise, and if you want to go on a darker, more twisted route, it's similar to Dead Space, where the black markers create sentient life, kind of like the theory of mushrooms making apes turn into humans, and it kind of guides civilization towards becoming, this metropolis, right? And by engineering these forms of life, or even creating life through crashing on a planet and altering the atmosphere and things like that, this sinister black marker creates bacteria, and then it literally over time manipulates that bacteria into sentient creatures. And by guiding with the invisible hand the civilization towards overpopulation, they're looking for a power source. And then the black marker reveals itself as potentially having limitless power. So they reverse engineer the black marker and create lesser red markers and spread it throughout the planet. Little do people know that this black marker is a form of intergalactic consciousness, a hive mind connected to a gigantic fleshy abomination called the Brethren Moon. And there's a bunch of these moons. They're giant moons made out of flesh that harvest planets and are eternal hunger incarnate. And basically they send a signal Like when it's all said and done, there's all these red markers across the planet. They activate a signal which modifies the DNA of every creature and twists and contorts their form into necromorphs. And then after the entire planet's become zombies, the necromorphs kind of turn into this one unified biomass, and the entire planet starts to become a brethren moon, and the planet's destroyed. And you have this big entity that can create black markers. Humans can't create black markers in that kind of universe, only red markers, a lesser copy. And there's this weird chicken and egg argument in the Dead Space community over were the brethren moon created by the black markers, or was the black markers created by the brethren moon? Because it seems like neither can exist without being created from the other. So it's this weird thing. It's like, did some sentient civilization create either the brethren moon or the black markers? Like, where did the start of the cycle start? Maybe they were both one thing and they just evolved into separate things. Who knows? But it's weird because the brethren moons are a sentient, fleshy creature. But yeah, it's weird because the brethren moons are a fleshy kind of animal creature, and the markers seem to be made out of inorganic material, like it's a form of technology. So it's a weird kind of notion, and it's kind of like a sinister, inverted version of the previous example, the Eternals, and the Celestials and all that movie. So those two are very much related on some level. Well, I think Aldrassil is the same thing. Basically, within its sphere, which is protected by a firmament, which is the layer between the inhabitants of the spaceship and then the void of space, and protects the living inside. It's the shell of the egg. It's the thing that protects our world from any hyper predator that exists in the void, like Yaldabaoth, that is like a worm that wants to go into the apple of the tree and eat it from the inside out before its seeds can germinate, right? And then basically when this this sphere from Aldrassil was full of life, what happened was it broke off from the tree, and mostly anything in the void basically dissolves into nothingness. It can only exist by feeding off the tree on a very parasitic level. And the exception is these balls, these spheres. When they reach maturity, they break off of the tree. And this one that broke off of Aldrassil went into the void. And because it reached full development, full life, every form of sentient life was sacrificed and merged into kind of like a caterpillar in a chrysalis. Its body dissolves into goo, leaving a brain, and then its body reconfigures and uses this goo as protein to create a butterfly. Well, essentially a gigantic tree rips out of the cosmic void, pulling up energy from Brahman and becoming a new tree. So there are millions of trillions of different greater spheres, or greater dimensions, as I call them, and I can't begin to make sense of any of them other than Midgard, where I barely have a grasp. I think maybe I'm arrogant for saying this. I think I understand 30% of Midgard, which is audacious, because I'd say that most people don't understand 1% of it. I think the closest we can get in this life, in our mortal state, is 30%. And I know a few people that I think are there in that regard, but that leaves the rest of what's unknown to me, right? So Midgard is this giant fruit, this giant nut on the tree, this giant pine cone. And it has a layer that we call the firmament that protects us from the cosmic void of Kali or Tiamat. It's cold darkness, And basically, within our greater dimension, our lesser dimensions, the first dimension, the second dimension, the third dimension where we live in, the fourth, the fifth, and it keeps going, and that's part of what I can't comprehend. I don't know how many dimensions are above the fourth dimension. I believe it goes up to 100, but I don't know if it goes past that. But these are all lesser dimensions. Even the highest dimensions are just as lesser as its lowest. I have to think that there is a starting point, unless there isn't. Maybe there is something below the first dimension, a negative lesser dimension, but I don't know if that's true. I don't think so. But I also don't think so because I can't comprehend it. And Midgard and all of its beauty is incomprehensible in its totality. So that's more of probably a human failing, and maybe even a limitation of language, because language itself is reductive. You know, for a lot of history, we didn't even know what the color blue was until we came up with a word for it. And we're like, oh yeah, that exists. And now we have many shades of blue, right? It's like psychedelic experiences where you can't comprehend it and you're thinking, oh, it's this just absolute surrender. You'll never understand it. I think you can, but you need to develop language and break down these experiences and make a science out of it. And maybe you'll be able to map out the trip plane. But anyways, how do I put this? Within the third dimension, we have, galaxies. We have the physical universe, but we also have the immaterial universe. And then we have the mental universe, which is something I'll get into, but it's so important that I have to talk about it last. And I make sense of these three in terms of three rings. They're the three main kind of components of Midgard. The ones that are most relevant to us or whatever. And like I said, I'll get to why the mental realm is almost irrelevant, despite being way more important than the astral and the physical. But, to our left, we have the realm of salt. We have our physical world, our material universe, our physics and time and things like that, gravity. And then to the right, we have the realm of sulfur. We have the astral, as I call it, or the immaterium. I'll be using a lot of Warhammer 40K logic because it helps me make sense of it, But we live in the materium, and then there's the immaterium, or the warp, right? And the way I view it is this important dimension of time does not work the way I think people think it works, right? On some level, I think it's an illusion, but in some way, I think it's a very strong concrete bedrock. So I'll be viewing things from a dualistic point of view, as if these two rings are separate from each other. So you can kind of take it in bite-sized pieces, but then they'll go back together. And you see why it's important to keep them together and not just like treating them like two separate things where one is higher than the other or lower than the other, right? But let's just separate them, right, for a moment, just take them apart. In the physical universe, I believe there is no past. I believe the past never happened. I believe if you're viewing things in a physical way, I believe none of us were ever born, right? And I believe none of us ever died. I believe that there is only the present, the power of now, by Eckhart Tolle. But within the material universe, there was just the present. The past and future doesn't exist. It's a perpetual, consistent present, right? You were only born in the present. And now that that's no longer the present, you were never born. You only die in the present moment. So after that, you've never died, right? So after that, you were neither born, you never lived, and you never died, right? Which I know that sounds heavy-hearted. Oh, man. It's just like, ooh, that's a little intense. Well, yeah, whatever. And then I believe the equivalent of time in the immaterial is what I would call Varkalia, where since there is no present in the astral or the immaterial, there's just forward and backwards. You can move in any direction other than the center, right? And it's chaos, whereas our material is order, right? You have the chaos symbol, but then you have the opposite, where it's kind of inverted arrows pointing inwards, right? Which is ironic because it's kind of, the arrows are, despite pointing inwards, spreading, farther and farther apart into this kind of entropy, this kind of cosmic hunger, so to speak, this dispersal of energy. And I believe that the physical and spiritual, the material and immaterium, are two reflections of each other. They're inverted. They're the upside down of each other. And I think spirits die. When they incarnate into a creature in the material universe, that's our equivalent of dying and going to the spirit world, right? And what I believe is that, every single physical object in the physical present of our material universe has an imitation in the spiritual, right? And I believe that since, the realm of salt relies more on material and not ideas, not emotions, not concepts, or rather, in the spiritual realm does, basically in the physical world, I'm looking at a chair made out of wood, right? But in reality, there's no actual difference between that chair and a wooden cabinet or a walking stick. It's just wood, but we have arranged it in a shape in which we inherently know that it's a chair. It has an essence of chairness, and I believe that essence of chairness comes from the astral realm. It comes from the immaterial. And, what takes primacy in the material world is the fact that this is wood, that this is a material, just as how there is no such thing as a fish. There are many creatures that we know are fish, but physically they're what they are physically. They are matter. We only have a concept of them being fish because of the spirit, right? And I believe in the spirit realm, if you see a chair, you're only coming across a manifestation of the idea, of the information, of the concept of the chair. You're not coming across a physical chair. So it looks visually, if you go to the spirit world, it looks like a visual chair, right? But you touch it and it's just the information. It's just the notion of the existence of a chair, if that makes sense. So thinking about it like this, the primacy of the chair in the immaterial is the concept of it, and the visualization is the second part, whereas in the physical, it's the primacy is the material, the matter, and then second is the idea of the chair, right? But every physical object, hold on.